For all you fear porn lovers, here's another one. For all you ADOS fear porn lovers, here's a good one. Convicts are returning to farming. Anti-immigrant policies are the reason. Migrant agricultural workers kept out of the U.S. by tough immigration laws are now being replaced by prison labor. The author is Stian Rice, food system geographer for the Urban Environmental Research Education, University of Maryland, Baltimore County. Prison inmates are picking fruits and vegetables at rates not seen since Jim Crow. Convict leasing for agriculture, a system that allows states to sell prison labor to private farms, became infamous in the late 1800s for the brutal conditions it imposed on captive, mostly black workers. Federal and state laws prohibited convict leasing for most of the 20th century, but the once notorious practice is making a comeback. Under lucrative arrangements, states are increasingly leasing prisoners to private corporations to harvest food for American consumers. Why now? The U.S. food system relies on cheap labor. Today, median income from farm workers is U.S. $10.66 an hour, with 33% of the farm worker households living below the poverty line. Historic agriculture has suppressed wages and eschewed worker protections by hiring from vulnerable groups such as undocumented migrants. By some estimates, 70% of agriculture's 1.2 million workers are undocumented. As current anti-immigrant policies diminish the supply of migrant workers, both documented and undocumented, farmers are not able to find the labor they need. So in states such as Arizona, Idaho, and Washington that grow labor-intensive crops like onions, apples, and tomatoes, prison systems have responded by leasing convicts to growers desperate for workers. The racist roots of convict leasing. Since Reconstruction, states have used prisoners to solve labor supply problems in industries such as road and rail construction, mining, and agriculture. But convict leasing has also been a powerful weapon of white supremacy and now anti-immigrant sentiment. After emancipation, Southern economies faced a crisis: how to maintain a racial caste system and a supply of surplus labor now that blacks were free. Southern states passed vagrancy laws, black codes, and other legislations to selectively incarcerate freed slaves. For example, under Mississippi's vagrancy law, all black men had to provide written proof of a job or face a $50 fine. Those who could not pay were forced to work for any white man willing to pay the fine, an amount that was deducted from the black man's wages. During the late 1800s, mass incarceration created an army of cheap labor that could be leased to private businesses for substantial profit. In 1886, state revenues from leasing exceeded the cost of running prisons by nearly 400%. Between 1870 and 1910, 88% of convicts leased in Georgia were black. But cheap convict labor also suppressed wages for free whites, and by 1900, poor whites began pushing back. In 1904, James Vardaman was elected governor of Mississippi on a platform of returning whites to work and blacks to confinement. These populist white supremacist sentiments dovetailed with national economic concerns during the Great Depression, when agricultural failures led to widespread unemployment. In the 1930s, the Ashurst-Summers Act and accompanying state laws prohibited convict leasing and the sale of prisoner-made goods on the open market. Inmates still worked in agriculture, but the food they produced had to be consumed by other prisoners or state workers. By the late 1970s, growing competition from foreign manufacturing, U.S. companies sought out domestic sources of cheap labor. Under pressure from corporate lobbies like the American Legislative Exchange Council, Congress relaxed restrictions on convict leasing with the Justice System Improvement Act. As the manufacturing service sectors began hiring prisoners, agriculture expanded its use of migrant workers. Profit and exploitation. Today, convict leasing offers significant revenues for prisons. Most wages paid to inmates are garnished by prisons to cover incarceration costs and pay victim restitution programs. In some cases, prisoners see no money compensation whatsoever. In 2015 and 2016, the California Prison Industry Authority made over $2 million from its food and agricultural sector, which is not even close to what it costs to actually lock people up. Growers can reach significant revenues too. Inmates are excluded from federal minimum wage protections, allowing prison systems to lease convicts at a rate below the going labor rate. In Arizona, inmates leased to the Arizona Correctional Industries ACI receive a wage of $3 to $4 per hour before deductions. Meanwhile, the state's minimum wage for most non-incarcerated farm workers is $11 an hour. Beyond the unfairness of low wages, inadequate state and federal regulations ensure that agricultural work continues to be onerous. Laborers endure long hours, repetitive motion injuries, temperature and humidity extremes, and exposures to caustic and carcinogenic chemicals. For inmates, these circumstances are unlikely to change. U.S. courts have ruled that prisoners are prohibited from organizing for higher wages and working conditions, though strikes have occurred in recent years. Furthermore, inmates are not legally considered employees, which means they are excluded from the protections under parts of the 1964 Civil Rights Act and Equal Pay Act, Fair Labor Standards Act, and the National Labor Relations Act, and the Federal Tort Claims Act. Whose labor is being sold? The total number and racial makeup of leased inmates is difficult to calculate. Not all prison systems report on farming operations or leased labor arrangements. According to one advocacy group, at least 30,000 inmates work within the food system. But to the extent convict leasing reflects overall inmate demographics, prison agriculture is distinctly racial. Blacks make up 39% of inmates, but only 12% of the general population, making blacks 6 times more likely than whites to be incarcerated. Over the last 50 years, the same period that saw the return of convict leasing, black incarceration rate quadrupled. Proponents of prison industries argue that leasing provides rehabilitative benefits like on-the-job training for entry, but research shows that within the prison system, whites receive better jobs than blacks with better pay and more beneficial skills. Whereas migrant workers often benefit home communities by returning a portion of their wages as remittances. The garnishing or non-payment of convict wages prevents inmates from contributing to their families and home economies. Since emancipation, agriculture has moved its focus from one labor source to another in response to shifting currents of populism, nativism, and racism. All three benefit from the exploitation of minority populations, and all three justify policies of exploitations in economic terms. Convict leasing is the first and now the latest strategy. So push out migrants and we get to play Negro again. Thought Jim Crow was gone. Guess what, blackies? It's back. Now, it may be a short-term problem because automation may come in and actually remove those jobs, which is something I anticipate, but still, they're going to use prisoners to fill this gap. Because, you know, if there's going to be automation, they're going to have to push immigrants out because there won't be enough jobs for the population, much less people coming in. But in a liberal country like the United States, who can tell? And how many citizens now are used to farm work? Because most folks, you know, when my mother was a child, they grew up with it. So basically, if you grow up as sharecropping, working on a farm or working in the fields is second nature because that's what you grow up with. Most people in America are not socialized to actually work in on a farm or in a field. But hey, that's about to change, evidently. If they're going to push immigrants out, the labor force that's out there is going to have to take up some slack. Beware you single mothers in the South. Beware you black men that don't have any jobs. You're going to get to do what your great grandparents did back in the day. I'm not saying it's coming, but beware. There's a old saying by Mark Twain. History doesn't repeat itself, but it sure does rhyme. And I hear that trap beat coming towards us. The old Jim Crow song with the little banjo and the trap beat. It's the remix. Racism remix is on the prowl right now. So y'all be careful out there. Don't get caught up. Do your due diligence. Stay out of prison. If they implement what happened in the 30s with the deplorable conditions that they put the prisoners under, you might not want to be in that system. You just might not want to be in that system. I'm not saying it's for sure, but I don't put anything past white folks. But with that, I'm going to jump off here. This is BGS out, and I will see you fear porn lovers on the next one. Peace.